Cinderella of Research, because it is often seen as the poor relation to primary research, or the dull but necessary prelude to a research report or a proposal. However, know that a good review can extract new ideas from others' work by synthesizing and summarizing previous sources. New theories can be built from the evidence discussed, and new directions for future research can be suggested. A literature review can facilitate the use of best available evidence in daily practice by supplying answers to clinical questions, for instance. And literature reviews are also an ideal first step into the world of publishing. First of all, what is a literature review? Is a critical summary of all the published works on a particular topic. And most research papers include a section on literature review as part of the introduction. However, literature review can also be published as a standalone article. Literature reviews, along with systematic reviews and meta-analysis, come under the broad category of review articles. So review article is an overview of critical assessment of existing literature in a field, which often analyzes specific issues, identifies trends, and points out research gaps in existing literature. So we could say that review articles are actually gold mines, virtual gold mines of information, as readers are able to form an idea about the current state of understanding on a topic and decide whether to read each article individually. And such articles are actually extremely useful for both new researchers and scientists in the field to keep updated of developments in this field, to find gaps in research, identify new research areas. So it's, in a sense, we could say that literature review identifies, evaluates, and synthesizes the relevant literature within a particular field of research, and it clarifies how knowledge has evolved within the field, what has already been done, what is generally accepted, and what is the current state of thinking. We talk about, of course, the word literature refers to a collection of published information or material, particular area or topic. Literature review does not need to be inclusive of every article, book that it has written on this topic, but it should include the key sources related to the main debate, trends, or gaps. So when we talk about review, this has to do how to identify emergent trends I mentioned before, areas of controversy or conflict among different thoughts of schools of thought, and how our research will extend, how we'll build upon and develop further. So the act of reviewing, of course, involves evaluating individual sources as well as synthesizing these sources. So why? Because not only we will need to engage with a body of literature, we also need to be able to compare, to contrast, to synthesize, and make arguments. So analysis and synthesis may appear as two opposing, we could say, methods, but they are both necessary in literature review, and they're complementary. So what would be the characteristics of literature review? First, it should be comprehensive, so evidence should be gathered from all relevant sources, fully referenced, balanced between different ideas and opinions, should be critical also, and analytical, developing new ideas and opinions. So literature review can provide a concise examination, discussions of evidence in a particular area, and the author should provide readers with a clear picture of the subject and its associated range of perspectives and opposing views, and avoid presenting what would say dry lists of poorly debated facts which are randomly selected and referenced. I guess you know the difference between the annotated bibliography and the literature review. The annotated bibliography is just a list of sources, and sometimes maybe contain an assessment of the source value, but there is no effort actually to synthesize the very source into a coherent conclusion. The types of literature review could be, first of all, a systematic review, which actually asks a specific question and answers it by summarizing evidence that meets a set of pre-specified criteria. Systematic review has its roots in evidence-based medicine, but then came to interact into other areas of study. This has to do with the steps when we talk about systematic review: identify the research question, define inclusion, exclusion criteria, search for studies, select studies, extract data, assess quality, and synthesize, present results. And as I said before, systematic review always follows pre-specified methods, which methods are explicit and applicable, and results and conclusions are based on the evidence. On the other hand, on the other hand, literature review does not specify inclusion-exclusion criteria, what we saw in systematic review. They do not answer a clinical question, and the conclusions might be influenced by the author's views. The literature review usually is important for primary research, and this it's very important. If we talk about secondary data analysis projects, the secondary data review can be undertaken where we have a few facts about the subject, whether if we have also a wealth of information about this. Other types of literature review is selective comprehensive approach, chronological thematic approach, and conducting a literature review. Remember that it's something which is ongoing. It is not linear. It's something that's your review is usually revisited. So it's something which is a dynamic. It always changes. I forgot to say here about the gray literature, which actually has materials that are unpublished or have been published outside the typical commercial or academic publishing environment, or which some of these materials are not easy to find. And this may include conference proceedings or policy studies, reports, white papers, annual reports, government publications. For the most part, gray literature can be used in the same way as scholarly literature. Now, I think here the most important part is that, I forgot to say here that when we review the literature, it's best to concentrate on primary evidence rather than secondary evidence, because primary evidence is guaranteed that the reader can analyze, can interpret the original evidence for himself, and this way can eliminate potential bias. So when we talk about literature review, we have in mind all these questions that we should formulate, such as: is the problem or issue and its significance are clearly defined? Does the author appeal to emotional use rhetoric? What is the research orientation? Qualitative, quantitative, what are the mixed methods? Things like that. So if we talk about literature of in quantitative research, sampling size and techniques, these are some methods and questions like: are the results generalizable to a wider population? Was the power of the study calculated? Are there any obvious biases? Are the conclusions validly based on the data and the analysis? And usually, how to conduct quantitative research in the literature focuses on these points. First, start with one or more explicitly stated hypotheses that will remain unchanged throughout the study, because the validity of the hypothesis is evaluated only after the data have been analyzed. Secondly, selecting an unbiased sample from a particular population. That could be, for instance, a simple random sample obtained by drawing names out of a hat, for instance, or use a relatively large sample of participants. Another important thing: use measures that can be scored objectively. That could be a multiple choice achievement test, or some questionnaires or attitude scales, personality scales, with choices that participants mark. present results using statistics and make inferences to the population from which the sample was drawn. And have in mind also these things, these guidelines. Of course, we don't have the time to analyze them, to know whether the study is experimental or non-experimental. If we talk about experiment, not whether participants were assigned at random to treatment conditions, for instance, or to examine cause and effect issues in non-experimental studies, consider the test-retest reliability of a measure, consider the internal consistency, reliability of a measure, the validity also of a measure, consider whether a measure is valid for a particular research purpose, know how the participants were sampled, always pay attention on the demographics of the participants, know how large a difference is, presume that quantitative studies are flawed also, and the questions which are based on these guidelines. These questions like this, is the studies experimental, were the participants assigned at random? If not, how they were assigned? Questions like this, has the researcher described the demographics of the participants in sufficient detail? And on the other hand, we talk about qualitative study. Of course, these are the main methods, regulation, using more than one method of data capture and audit trail, or peer review, member checking, when interpretation of the data shared with participants, data saturation, when data are gathered constantly until all the themes are exhausted, negative case analysis. When we look for contrasting experiences or examples to disprove emerging theories, and some guidelines on this, how to conduct qualitative research, start with a general problem without imposing specific purpose and hypothesis to guide the study. Select a purposive sample, not a random one. Use a relatively small sample. Measure intensively. Present results mainly or exclusively in words with an emphasis or understanding the particular purposive sample studied, and note whether the research was conducted by individual or a team, whether outside experts were consulted, whether participants were consulted on the interpretation of the data, whether researchers used the proposed sample as said before, whether demographics are described, whether quantities are provided, when qualitative researchers discuss quantitative matters, things like that. And the second part of this presentation has to do with the structure of the literature review, which is crucial. We'll know about these parts. We should begin with introduction. We'll provide the framework for the reader by providing a brief summary of the area of interest, the relevance to the reader. And the method section will describe the search strategy, including database used and other sources of information explored. It will also include the keywords used, as well as the inclusion and exclusion criteria and explanation of why these were selected. Discussion section of the body of the article. Here is easier to break the main section up into thematic areas and treat each area as a mini review. And this section can also be organized chronologically depending on the focus of the review. Each section should be comprehensive as possible, and the conclusion should be answered if this article actually changed practice or added to the discussion of the subject. Of course, this has to do start our review. We start first of all, for us, the previous speaker said about the purpose, why we are writing a literature review, how this will influence this approach that we want to explore. And the focus, second step is define the focus of the review. You know, often the difficulty is not the topic selection, but how to narrow the focus of the review down to a manageable size. This is, I think, the main challenge of researchers. Keywords, keywords are important in review. The question, search strategy, and criteria for excluding studies from the review are decided before conducting, of course, the literature search, and should all be explicitly defined in the methods section of the final article. The keywords are considered as the cornerstone of an effective search. So before starting, it is crucial to consider all possible words that might relate to the topic. So we search the literature, and sometimes, as I said before, select the topic, narrow the topic, read the selected articles thoroughly and evaluate them, organize the selected papers by looking for patterns in the development subtopics, develop a thesis or purpose statement, guidelines for writing first draft, select a topic. So this means that define your general topic, familiarize yourself with the basic organization of an online database that you have selected. Begin your search with a general keyword, then you have to limit the output. Then you have to identify narrow topic areas, increase afterwards your reference list, and you have to consider also if it is valuable for you to search for unpublished studies, searching because this sometimes has another value. Look for review articles, identify the landmark or classic studies and theories, start with the most current search and work backward. Assemble the collection of sources you plan to include in your review, and write the first draft of your topic statement. Narrow your topic, as said before, how to limit the scope to a smaller topic, and evaluate, synthesize the study's findings. This has to do with if we pay attention to assumptions, methodologies, experts in the field, conflicting theories. And we organize the selected papers by looking for patterns. So we note here the important trends in research, the most influential theories, the findings that are common or are more debated. Then we develop a thesis or purpose statement, write 2 or 2 sentence statements summarizing the conclusions that we have reached about the major trends. Guidelines for writing the first draft begin by identifying the broad problem, but we avoid global statements, indicate why the topic being reviewed is important, distinguish between research findings and other sources of information, indicate why certain studies are important, and be specific also in time frame. Discuss other literature reviews on your topic if you find an earlier published. Avoid long list of non-specific references in academic writing. Speculates on the reasons for inconsistent findings in previous research review section of a thesis dissertation. Follow always organizational structure that you have developed above. Make sure that each section links logically to the one before and after. Structure your sections by themes or subtopics. Prioritize analysis over description. And when you have to review your work, you make an outline of each section of the paper. You decide whether you need to add information or to delete irrelevant information. Make certain that all the citation references are correct and that you are referencing the appropriate style of your discipline. And check about, of course, grammatical spelling errors. Sentences should flow smoothly and logically. Text should be written in a clear, concise academic style, and acceptable sources for literature reviews should be all these. You're familiarized with this: peer review journal articles, edited academic books, articles in professional journals, peer review journal articles. And the final article must contain this structure that I mentioned before, the parts of the components of the final article should be introduction, methods, board discussion, conclusion, reference list. And before concluding, I want to say that a good review is always a precious tool. And remember that originality rarely means starting from scratch, but we look to expand what's already known. And this is the magic of research. So thank you very much for your attention. I think it was a huge